Hey friends, over the course of the first 7 books of the Bible, we get a front row seat to these grand stories filled with epic faith, miracles, battles, and monumental testaments to how God protected and provided for his people. But then we have a subtle shift after the 7th book. After the book of Judges, we have a short 4-chapter book, the book of Ruth. There's a sharp contrast in what we see in Ruth compared to the previous epic narratives. So after experiencing a 40,000-foot view of the many heroic leaders of the nation of Israel, we pause and zoom in and see the personal and quiet story of Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. Set against the backdrop of the judges, Deborah, Gideon, Samson, Ruth and Naomi move back to Israel from Moab, both widows and both lacking protection and provision. So having to provide for themselves to find food, Ruth is introduced to Boaz, a wealthy landowner, where they fall in love, pursue a relationship, and get married. So why is God telling us this story? Why now? Why pause the intense storytelling of the history of the judges? Why shift away from the dramatic to the quiet? Well, this is our first lesson in looking at the book of Ruth. God moves in the quiet and the small in just the same ways that he moves in the loud and the monumental. And what's also interesting is that Ruth is the first book of the Bible where we don't directly see God speak to the characters we're reading about. But that doesn't mean he was not working in their lives with historic and miraculous perspective. The book of Ruth is a real story about real people amidst real painful issues and seeking real solutions. We see through their actions and beliefs that they believed in their mighty God and were faithful and trustworthy and honored his laws and commands. And yes, God will use real and imperfect people as he advances his story, his purposes, and his plans. Naomi was a childless widow, Ruth was a Moabite, and Boaz was a direct descendant of Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho. These weren't great military leaders, priests, or prophets. These were people who were obedient to God and walked with purpose the paths that God laid out for them. There are no parting of the Red Sea moments here. God did not speak through a fiery bush. There was no miraculous supply of water from a rock or manna from the skies. God's will was to work behind the scenes for Ruth and Boaz. Miracles were still happening in the story. They just looked different. The whole reason Ruth met Boaz is that she was out in the fields picking leftover grain for her and her mother-in-law. And it's there that she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz. And it was this coincidence, this miracle, that led to a relationship, which led to a marriage that produced a family which King David was born into. And this ancestral line continued and led to our Messiah, Jesus Christ. The story of Ruth is about prophetic provision. God worked with purpose in the lives of this woman and this man to bring about salvation for all people. So what do our lives look like today? Our lives might not include mighty miraculous visuals like pillars of fire, but that doesn't mean that God isn't working in our lives with equally powerful and significant miracles and divine actions. The question is, are we looking for them and are we expecting them? Because he has a specific calling and purpose for you today.